Hi, and welcome back to Know What's Cooking, where we're changing the world one recipe at a time with a splash of physics. Today is day 3 of the 2022 Sustainable Food Cooking Challenge. Thanks so much for coming back into my kitchen and experimenting with some of these recipes. I'm predicting that today's recipe will be the one that's maybe most watched in this series. We are going to make a decadent steamed chocolate cake, which never sees an oven. So right off the bat, it's a low energy cooking strategy. This cake is made from scratch, and so it eliminates the packaging and random ingredients that make their way into a box of cake mix, but it comes together really quickly and we don't compromise anything in the way of flavor. So let's go ahead and get started. Probably the hardest part of this recipe is just putting together the equipment. The recipe itself comes together really quickly, but once you have the equipment assembled, then you can make this cake on repeat because you'll have all the parts and pieces. And so what you need to do is try to find a cooking pot that accommodates a cake pan. And so I'm going to be cooking on an 8-inch cake pan, but also this recipe works with a 9-inch cook pan. So I have made it before in this large enameled cast iron pot, and you can see that a 9-inch pan fits in there. I'm choosing to use this stainless steel all-clad instead, and I'll talk about why that's important later. If you don't have a cake pan, I know a lot of people that follow the series are new to the cooking world. Also, these to-go containers work really well, and these often fit down into some large stock pots, so that's a good option also. One thing you want to make sure when you're choosing the size of pan versus the size of pot is you want to make sure you have a pretty generous gap around the cake pan to the edge of the pot that you're cooking in, because you want to make sure you have a really good steamy environment above this. And so if you only have a little sliver, it just barely fits down in there. It's almost like putting a cap on the water, and the steam can't really sort of inhabit the space above the cake. So that's the first thing you want to do, is take about 2 cups of water and put it in the pot and bring it to a boil. The other thing you'll need is some kind of a trivet. If you don't have one of these, I've also found that an empty tuna can works really well, right? So it's just the right height to kind of hold the cake pan up above the water too. You just want to empty the can and wash it and then fill it with water too while you bring the water up to a boil. I'm going to go ahead and put my trivet down into the water as it's coming up to a boil and put the lid on it. All right, the other thing we're going to need is some kind of a sling so we can lower the cake pan down into the boiling water and then, more importantly, lift it back up when it's done. So they actually make slings for this purpose. This is a silicone sling with some handles. And so you can lower it down and lift it back up. I really doubt many of you have this. And so what also works very well is just a sheet of aluminum foil. Remembering that aluminum foil is a high energy material, and so we want to be really careful about how often we use it, or if we use it, if we can reuse it. This same material has been used as the sling for many cakes that I've made like this. And so when you're done, you can just dry it out and keep it and use it next time around. And so again, I just fold it in half, and then I fold it in half one more time, and then the cake pan will fit on top of here, and it'll give me some handles to lower it down and raise it back up. Super. The last thing you want to do is make sure that you cut a piece of parchment paper that fits down into the bottom of your cake pan, and this will make it much easier to unearth the cake when you're done. And I'm just going to give that the cake pan and the parchment paper just a really light brush with some oil, just to make it even easier to take the pan out when we're done. So again, I'm just sort of brushing the edges of this pan and the parchment paper. So that's it. That, again, is about the hardest part. You have a pot, you have a trivet in the bottom, about 2 cups of boiling water, you have a cake pan, either an 8-inch or a 9-inch, you have some kind of a sling, and a piece of parchment paper. All right, let's go ahead and put the ingredients together. If you have a stand mixer, that's a really easy way to combine all the ingredients. I'm just going to use a bowl and a fork to show that this is really easy and you don't need any kind of elaborate equipment. So the first thing we're going to do is put in a stick of butter, and that's one substitution I'm making, is I'm using a plant-based butter. This is one case that you will not recognize that you have substituted regular butter with plant-based butter, and plant-based butter has a much lower environmental impact, less land use, and less greenhouse gas emissions. Also, it's great because when it's at room temperature, it's softer than regular butter, and so that makes it easier to combine as well. If you forgot to bring your butter to room temperature, which I pretty much forget all the time, you can stick it in the microwave for about 30 seconds at 50% power, and that'll get you most of the way there. So again, we're sticking 1 stick of butter, and again, this recipe is for an 8-inch cake pan. I'll also include the recipe in the notes if you're using a 9-inch pan. Another substitution I made from the original recipe was to substitute whole milk yogurt for some of the butter. And I think in this recipe you don't even notice it's there, and it does help with the nutrition a bit. Yogurt works really well as a fat replacement, and so does applesauce. So you might want to experiment with some of these things and see how they work. Okay, next we're going to add the sugar. I'm going to add 3/4 of a cup of sugar. Okay, now we just want to cream those things together, the butter, the yogurt, and the sugar. And I am just going to use a fork to combine these ingredients. All right, so we're just creaming together that butter and sugar and yogurt till they're all well combined. Okay, now we're going to add 3 eggs, 1 at a time. All right, now that the eggs are all combined, I'm just going to add the dry ingredients. That's 3/4 of a cup of flour. And 1/3 of a cup of cocoa powder or cacao powder. So it ends up that cacao powder is less processed because it's typically not roasted. And so it tends to retain more of its antioxidants, and it actually just has less embodied energy because there's less processing. So again, I'm adding 1/3 of a cup of this cocoa powder or cacao powder. Either of them works. Last, we're going to add 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. All right, that's all there is to it. Now we're just going to gently stir all those dry ingredients into the batter. So you just kind of want to start slow here to not make a real mess and just be patient. All of this will come together to a delicious batter before you know it. Looking delicious. All right, that's all there is to it. Okay, now we just want to gently scoop our batter onto this parchment paper that's in the bottom of our cake pan. Making sure to get all those morsels scooped out of there. Then we want to just gently distribute it into the pan. We want to try to keep that parchment paper still centered in the bottom of the pan. All right, that's all there is to it. Now we're just going to layer it down into this pot of already boiling water. Making sure the pan is centered in our sling. Right, you want to fold these little ends down a little bit so that the top can fit securely. And we want to lower the burner just to maintain a simmer. I find that if I put my burner at about a 3.5 out of 10, that's kind of perfect to continue to produce this steam, but not sort of waste energy by having it on too rapid of a boil. This cake is really forgiving for overcooking. So the only time I've ever had it flop is when I didn't cook it quite long enough. So we're going to start out with 25 minutes and then we will check it and see if it needs a little more time. Let's talk about why this is such an energy efficient strategy. And that's because we're using just a little bit of water. So remember that water has a really high specific heat, and that means it's really thermally sluggish, or energy hungry. So in order to change water's temperature, we have to put a lot of energy into it. And that means we should be really careful about how much water we're thermodynamically manipulating. Since we're really just relying on the steam in this case, and we only have the liquid water down at the bottom of the pan to continue to produce the steam, we only need about 2 cups of water. So that's a huge energy saving. And we're doing that instead of heating up the entire volume of our oven just to cook one cake. There's like 35 pounds of steel in an oven, and so that's also a great strategy. The other thing I love about this cake is that you can bake this cake. I don't know if it's actually called baking if it never sees an oven. You can cook this cake when you're in a situation that you don't have an oven, but you still want a chocolate cake, right? So think about camping, for example. This is a great cake that you could make without an oven while you're camping. The other little bit of physics I wanted to add to this recipe is that when you're talking about cooking in a stock pot, right? So you start to think about what are the important thermodynamic properties of the material of the stock pot that you choose. And it ends up that typically when we're doing things in a stock pot, the water is the thermodynamically dominant factor, right? Because again, it's so thermally sluggish that it tends to sort of dominate the cooking process. And so the material doesn't matter as much. The research I'm doing currently with a material science colleague is to understand the impact of the exterior emissivity of the pot to the thermodynamic efficiency of the cooking process. So I'm choosing a shiny pot. This is what we call a pot that has a low emissivity. In other words, it's not a good radiator. It's a really good reflector, but it doesn't do a good job of sort of throwing its thermal energy into the room via radiation. If instead I chose like an enameled cast iron or a cast iron or anodized aluminum pot, these black or painted pots that are really good emitters have an emissivity close to 1. They basically act like a radiator in your kitchen. And so the thermal energy that's in here just kind of gets thrown into the room. And so then you have to end up adding more energy to keep the system to the temperature that you're trying to achieve. Not only that, but this thermal energy that's being thrown out into the room with these darker pots then puts a burden on your air conditioning system. So if you're cooking in the summer, then you're putting an additional load on how much that air conditioner has to work to overcome this additional heat load. So when cooking in stock pots, using a shiny exterior surface is a really energy efficient choice. So while you're cooking this, you want to try to avoid peeking, and I know that's difficult because it's starting to smell really delicious here for me. You can listen to make sure that you still hear that boiling water. Depending on how tight of a seal you have on your pot, you may need to add more boiling water during this period of time if you think that the pan has dried. I would recommend adding boiling water and not just tap water. And also you have to be really careful then that you're pouring it carefully between the pot and the cake so that you don't pour it onto the cake. If you have to open the pan to do that, that's fine. I would just add about another 5 or 10 minutes to the cook time. This cake is a really great idea if you're hosting a dinner party and you want to just start the cake right before you all sit down to dinner. And then you can eat this warm, steamy, moist chocolate cake afterwards. I made this cake for a group of students recently, and one of them commented on how eating that warm cake with a little bit of powdered sugar on top was kind of like eating a Krispy Kreme donut straight out of the glazer. I know. It's an incredible imposition for me to ask you to make a chocolate cake in the name of science and sustainability. But these are the things we need to do as we face the future, my friends. All right, so the buzzer rang. I'm going to just peek in on the cake and see what it's looking like. Again, when we remove the lid, we want to be really careful also to tilt it so that the water doesn't drip onto the cake. All right, it looks quite great. I'm just going to sort of jiggle it a little bit. Yeah, so it seems like the center of the cake looks really solid. The other thing that's a good test is just to sort of feel the middle of the cake, and that really bounces back really well. So I actually think this was about right. It cooked for 30 minutes, and so I'm going to remove it from the pan now. All right, I'm going to use some oven mitts and just grab onto these 2 aluminum foil slings. Make sure you get a good grip on them. And then just lift this up and onto my cooling rack. Turn the burner off. And I'm just going to let it sit here and cool for about 5 minutes. All right, so our cake has cooled a little bit, and I'm gonna go ahead and take it out of the pan onto the final serving plate. It's a good idea to take a knife and just sort of run it around the outside of the cake so that you just sort of making sure that it's not stuck to the edge. We know it's not stuck to the bottom because we have that piece of parchment paper in there. And so we just take a plate and invert it on top of here. Perfect. Now we just want to peel that piece of parchment paper off the bottom, noting that that parchment paper is reusable. This is probably the third time this piece of parchment's been used. I'll just wash it with a sponge and some soap and let it dry and fold it, and it'll be ready to go next time around. Now I'm just going to invert the final serving plate on top of here. And there is your amazing steamed chocolate cake that's energy efficient. The great news also is that you don't just have to make chocolate cake this way. I've made other kinds of cakes with this same method and it works great. All right, the final step is just to cut it and see what it's all about. This is what we're doing in the name of science, people. So we're gonna cut into this chocolate cake and see what it looks like on the inside. Yeah, so that is so delicious looking. So I don't think this chocolate cake requires any icing. I like dusting it with a little bit of powdered sugar. Makes it look kind of fancy schmancy. I also think that these are great opportunities to add some other fruits, some other kind of nutrients into our diet. So I'm going to put a little bit of fresh raspberries and some fresh blueberries there. Might even sprinkle a little bit of sliced almonds. Right, so we have this really amazing looking chocolate cake dessert. Even a little of whipped cream tastes really delicious on this as well. So there you have it. Day 3 is done. This decadent chocolate cake. I hope you enjoy it and make it over and over again. I think it's a great example of a food system that's not burdened by sustainability, but instead augmented by it. I think having these foods available that encourage us to gather with others, to relax and enjoy this food and each other are really important. I hope to see you back here for day 4. We're going to be making some pasta. Thanks a bunch. I know, making a chocolate cake is such an imposition to ask you to do in the name of science and environmental sustainability, but just suck it up and do it. Just do it for science. I am sorry to be asking you to make a chocolate cake for the future of science and sustainability, but these are the things we all must do as we face our future. Now, I've had to make a lot of these chocolate cakes to get this recipe just right. The things I do for science and sustainability. First, I just want to tell you that I really respect you for making chocolate cake for science and for a future sustainable planet. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing to change the planet, and in the name of science, making a chocolate cake. You are amazing.